Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 4 Remake, Professional Difficulty, S+, no damage, no nukem plus items, no charms, worse through. This will cover chapters 7 through 12, as well as the beginning half of chapter 13, all in the span of 1 hour. I know, right? I did not think I was going to be able to cram all of that footage together in less than an hour. I had to do a lot of editing, I had to render the video so many times to make room for the commentary. I also had to speed up a lot of gameplay, I had to remove a lot of gameplay as well. I say gameplay, just moments where I'm retrekking through areas and there's no enemies around, so why would you need to see that? And it all paid off in the end, so I can at least get the commentary started with this one. So we're now on chapter 7, this is the catapult sequence. I'm going to be able to implement Ether's suplex method this time, unlike the first one, where I didn't actually know Ether's method for getting suplexes consistently until he described it to me in a comment. So to actually show it here is good, because using the suplex method is a great way to save up on ammunition for this part, because none of the enemies transform into plagas, aside from one enemy. I'll also be shooting enemies in the leg when they're running at me in order to stab them in the head when they're on the ground, and I don't have to worry about it so much because I can repair my combat knife at the merchant. But in case you don't know what Ether's suplex method is, whenever the enemies are running at you, if you focus your reticle with the pistol and you shoot them in the stomach area, they will go into a dedicated flinch animation, which is this, and then you'll be able to knife them in the leg once and put them into an animation that allows you to punish them with a suplex. And the suplex will always kill the enemy so long as they are not an enemy that will transform. And that is why this is working. And also, even if they don't go into that flinch animation when you use the focus reticle system on them, it will still count as huge damage to their stun HP, allowing you to actually hit them in the leg to set them up for a suplex. And weirdly, the Mercenary Ganado, they work differently because you have to shoot them twice. Like, you have to focus your reticle and punish their sprint animation, then you have to wait for them to sprint again, focus your reticle, and then shoot them, and then they will be susceptible to a stun to the leg that will put them into a suplex posture. I don't know why it's so different with that enemy type. I really do not understand how the team could have made this kind of mistake with the stuns and why it is suddenly so different between these enemy factions, but I'm guessing it's just the result of 3 different teams within New Capcom handling the 3 individual sections of the game. But even then, like, the villagers and the zealots are pretty similar in their capabilities, and also with their stun HP. And then with the Mercenary Ganado, it's not just their stun HP that's different, there are other designs that are different with them as well. Like, for instance, there's a system that I believe I demonstrated in my worst through, where if you wait for a Mercenary Ganado to attack, and then you get behind them, specifically behind their left shoulder, when they're in their recovery frames of their animation, you can actually do a knife execution on them. It is very odd, and it can be very helpful if you're not too confident in your deflection timings, or when you're dealing with certain enemies like the Electro Staff Mercenary Ganado, because even when you parry him, it will not put him into a flinch animation that you can punish with a melee attack for some reason. So you just wait for him to try to attack you with his staff. As soon as he recovers from the animation, you just get behind him, wait for the prompt to appear, because it's very specific timing. The fact that the prompt disappears after a certain amount of time after the enemy does the attack is very conspicuous, because it almost makes it seem like the mechanic is intentional, but why would you tie that kind of intentional mechanic to bad detection on the knife execution? That doesn't make any sense at all. And also right here, you're noticing that I'm using flash grenades a lot. Since I didn't have flash grenades for the entirety of my worst through, or rather for a large percentage of my worst through when I was doing no merchant, I definitely have a lot of liberties to just use flash grenades greatly, and because the game drops so many large resources and a lot of gunpowder, I mean, you don't even need that much gunpowder anyway, because 5 gunpowder and 1 large resource can make 1 flash grenade. Because the drops are quite large, you can easily craft a lot of flash grenades and have a lot of liberties at your disposal with handling the sections. That's definitely the main advantage with doing no merchant first, then playing this game with the merchant. You can definitely see moments where you can just be very flexible with your resources and the like. But also, it just really showcases how much the merchant influences the natural flow of gameplay, because like I said before, a lot of sequences on this game are just designed around having a huge abundance of resources that you'll only get if you go to the merchant. And I already mentioned before in the first part of this worst through that the merchant, because of the fact that he influences the natural flow of gameplay so much, it gave the developers less incentive to, like, say for instance, rearrange the enemy placements intelligently, or rearrange the item placements on the harder difficulties, or make certain weapons accessible through trekking through a previous area or trekking through a large abundance of enemies. It's all just consolidated to the merchant, as well as with the crafting, and they make crafting such a huge part of the gameplay so much, and yet they lock it all behind the merchant, yet a lot of those crafting resources and supplies that you can get from the merchant are mandatory to actually make the sequence flow better in a lot of parts of the game. So it just makes you wonder why they made the merchant an optional feature if he's that integral to the natural flow of gameplay. And I know a lot of people will say, but you actually got through 15 chapters of Resident Evil 4 Remake on your previous worst through without using the merchant, so the game is clearly designed with no merchant in mind. But I had to resort to a lot of holes and exploits. I had to do a lot of dumb things to ensure that I could get through the sequences properly without wasting so much ammunition. And I had to implement a lot of gamey designs. I had to implement Ether's suplex method in a lot of situations that complemented exploits. And because of the fact that the gameplay is just so awkward, I had to reduce a lot of the awkward gameplay by relying upon these holes and exploits. So it's not indicative of an experience that is well designed for no merchant in mind. And, you know, a lot of people don't really understand why I talk a lot about no merchant. And it's all because if the experience is designed around using only the resources provided in the world and actually making your mechanics reliable and the like, not tying them all to a microtransaction system, then you therefore make a better game in the process. And I feel like the merchant influencing the fundamental flow of gameplay just adds more to the hollow nature displayed with this entire pre-alpha of a game. And I mentioned before in the previous part that the replayability of this game is severely low, and there's not a lot of sequences worth replaying in this pre-alpha. I mean, I say this, but I'm still playing this game because I am planning on doing extra content, and given that Separate Ways is going to be coming out soon, it gives me more of an incentive to still stick with this pre-alpha and introduce more poor designs videos, and also just play around with certain sections. Like, I was just playing around in Chapter 4, for instance, before I started this recording, and I was just dealing with the enemies in that one cave area that has those 3 symbols. And I was playing around with the deflect system, I was playing around with deflecting Molotovs and dynamite, and I came across poor designs with those particular mechanics that I'll be showcasing. But, you know, like, there's definitely something there, but it's not really for a normal gameplay experience. It's just trying to salvage something interesting, like, gameplay-wise, from this pre-alpha that is worth showing in a video, or is just worth going through just to satisfy your conscience, basically. I mean, that's really the only thing I can think of as to why I still return to this. But if I'm just replaying, like, a section in general, I feel like that only applies to very few sequences. And like I said before, the only sequences I ever really replay are just the El Gigante boss fight and Torres Mendez. Everything else is not worth replaying. Like, do I want to really waste time replaying the Navistador nest encounter in chapters 10 and 11? Do I really want to waste time replaying the Garador fight? Do I really want to waste time replaying Verdugo or Krauser? I mean, the only reason I even replay Krauser is because I am trying to salvage something positive from Krauser, given that he is the most disgraceful boss fight in this entire game, and he is honestly the worst Resident Evil boss ever made in all of Resident Evil history. And also, I just feel like with Krauser's boss fight in this game, I just feel like while it is unfinished, maybe I'm missing something, maybe I'm missing a hidden design, something else like that. And that's why I still replay him. And in the process, it's just causing me to contribute more time to him. I mean, that's probably one of the main reasons why I still replay him. But other than that, I just don't see it as a fight worth replaying in general because of how tragic it is as a boss fight. It's a completely unfinished mess. And the developers devoted little to no time making him intriguing. And instead, he's just so bullcrap in a lot of his capabilities. And it's just terrible. And not to mention his dialogue is bad, the music is just not complementing a good boss fight. The music would actually be serviceable for a really awesome boss fight, but when you're just running around in a circle like crazy, doing something on par with fighting Yawn from Resident Evil 1 Remake, why would I want to waste time listening to that kind of music, you know? It should be self-explanatory like that. But just resuming this main tangent, like everything else in terms of combat, like with these catapult sequences in Chapter 7, or this water room area, or with like Chapter 8, 9, 10, all these other chapters, I mean, there isn't a single chapter on this game that is worth replaying for the sake of playing it for fun, or for trying to discover something interesting, because I feel like I've already discovered everything possible with the sequences, and it all just reigns so hollow in the end. Like, this game doesn't try to do anything to make the gameplay interesting, or to make certain set pieces interesting, or to maybe, like, in the process of delivering underwhelming sequences that might be simple at face value, they could have enhanced the other aspects as well. And this actually leads me on to the tangent I want to discuss with Resident Evil Village, because I was replaying Resident Evil Village yesterday, and there's something about Resident Evil Village that is more enticing and more engaging than what I'm doing with Resident Evil 4 Remake. And as much as this game might have like better gameplay in the sense that the shotgun actually knocks over enemies, and that there is some creativity with flinch animations, like when you're shooting enemies in the leg and you stab them in the head with a knife, I just feel like with the way the gameplay mechanics are handled in general in Resident Evil 4 Remake, it honestly feels like it achieves the same result as what you'd be getting if you were just mindlessly running through a game in general, you know? But there's something about Resident Evil Village particularly that felt very enticing, and I don't know if it's just because I was going through sequences very fast, because Ethan's so much faster than Leon. I don't know if it's just the memorable encounters, but even then, when you're fighting bosses like Bella, like, I really consider Bella to be the worst first boss ever made in the entire Resident Evil series. And, you know, the first boss of Resident Evil 4 Remake is Delago. So you can't really say there's anything bad with Delago. It's just a pretty boring, dull fight. And at least the controls for the boat work. There's nothing else that's really bad about Delago in a gameplay sense. Because compared to Bella, Delago doesn't have any broken designs. Bella is just filled with many broken designs, and you're having to rely upon certain methods like shooting her in the leg while you're crouched to avoid the third hit in her combo attack, because why else would they allow you to avoid the first, second, and fourth hit of her combo by crouching if you can't actually avoid the third hit while crouching? It just makes no sense, and you have to use that kind of method. Not to mention, the hitboxes on their attacks are completely broken. You then have the Moriekas that have too much life, and they get in the way, and you're having to just place your mines in very strange locations, just spawn attack the enemies. You have to have a lot of forward knowledge with Bella on Village of Shadows difficulty, and it just really becomes a dumb encounter. And on the third-person mode and the VR mode, she's infinitely worse, because her hitboxes are infinitely worse on those modes. But even then, like, when even going through those kind of encounters, there is something positive I can salvage with Resident Evil Village. And I don't know how to explain it. And I really feel like I should do another walkthrough of Resident Evil Village, but going in with the knowledge I've obtained from Resident Evil 4 Remake. Because I feel like it'll be an interesting discussion to go on, comparing Resident Evil Village and Resident Evil 4 Remake, because Resident Evil 4 Remake definitely used Resident Evil Village as its template in a lot of cases. And like I said, even though like the general gameplay against the Ganado, when you're actually using shotguns and knocking over enemies or experimenting with flinch animations, is there compared to Resident Evil Village, there's just something so enticing about Resident Evil Village compared to this. It's really hard to explain, guys, so stay tuned for another potential walkthrough of Resident Evil Village. But I've just done that entire water room area by just using the same methodology I implemented back in my previous worst through of Resident Evil 4 Remake without using the merchant. And you can definitely tell that even with the merchant, the balance problems are still there, a lot of the other issues are there, just the way they've placed so many enemies in this room. And look at this, guys. The times when I'm shooting the enemies when they're grabbing Ashley with the sniper rifle, it's a goddamn sniper rifle, yet they will not flinch. You have to hit them at least 2 or 3 times in order for them to drop Ashley. Like, why is it so nonsensical with the way the flinch animations work? I mean, watch this. I mean, that right there, I got lucky because I dismembered her leg. But in general, it just takes 2 to 3 hits. And not to mention, you have Ashley just standing still, enemies crowding around her, and then they might be doing like micro movements that might throw off my aim, or when I'm trying to shoot them and then they suddenly move out of the way. It is really annoying. I mean, the only difference is I'm just killing them a lot faster because of the fact that I'm using a sniper rifle and not a pistol. There's really no difference or distinctions to note between no merchant and using the merchant for this sequence, and there are definitely a lot of sequences that play out the same way regardless of whether you're using the merchant or not. And again, this all ties back to the previous point I discussed in the first part of this worst through. The merchant doesn't fix many of the issues present in this pre-alpha of a game. He only fixes like a small percentage, or rather, he doesn't fix it, he just mitigates the poor designs at play. And the poor designs I dealt with are the same poor designs I was dealing with back in my blind playthrough and my previous worst through, a Resident Evil 4 remake. So I don't understand why people can say that all my criticisms towards Resident Evil 4 Remake as a whole are completely invalidated by the no merchant restriction. They're still there even when I'm using the merchant. And like I said before, the reason why I'm doing this worst through is to hate on the merchant system from a more informed context and to understand just how screwed up the balancing is even when I'm using the merchant. I mean, it's all indicative of underlying issues present with this pre-alpha of a game. And even when I'm crafting a lot of flash grenades, even when I'm crafting a lot of ammunition, even when I'm skipping a lot of sequences, it still doesn't change what this pre-alpha is. Also, by the way, since I have a grenade for this sequence, I'm going to be able to skip the puzzle rooms coming up. So if you stand right here and you throw a grenade through this gateway, you will destroy the counterweight on the other side. Then you'll be able to get past these enemies, and then you have this part. This sequence is still bad, regardless of whether you're using the merchant or not, because you're still encountering the poor enemy placements and the poor designs at play with this El Gigante. So when you're over here, you have to take cover behind this part of the wall right here. Do not take cover on the left one near the brazier, because he can still hit you with stupid detection. Then you have to stand right here, wait until he's about to throw the rocks, then move, so that he will not throw rocks at you when you're in the middle of running away from this guy, who's just placed there for the sake of being an absolute jerk. Then you need to hide right here, take out these enemies with the riot gun. Even unupgraded, the riot gun is very powerful. That's at least something I gotta give credit to for Resident Evil 4 Remake. The shotgun's so much better than how it is in Resident Evil Village. The shotgun's so slow in Resident Evil Village for no reason. Not to mention the damage is just very pitiful against the enemies, even when you're upgrading the shotgun. But also right there, I think if you stand right near this brazier, it will force the El Gigante to throw rocks in front of me rather than in the room I'm in right now. And you can dispatch these crossbowmen right over here. I still don't understand why they place these crossbowmen here in this kind of sequence where you have enemies behind you and you have an El Gigante throwing rocks at you. And the only possible way you're going to deal with these crossbowmen is to stand by that brazier and just wait until the El Gigante starts throwing rocks in front of you rather than at you, because it's just weird AI like that. I mean, it's really stupid the way the enemy placements are handled. And again, this is all independent of the merchant. The enemy placements are still lazy regardless of whether I'm using the merchant or not. And the gameplay is still slowed like this because of the fact that I'm having to accommodate for the poor designs at play. But now that we're over here, we can shoot this counterweight, we can get past this woman right over here, and then take out the other counterweight, and then use the cannon in order to kill the El Gigante and get rid of any stragglers. And at least since I've killed some of the enemies, they're not going to sneak up on me when I'm going to be using the cannon right over here. So this guy is dead. I'm going to take out this woman here, take out these enemies, and then bust through the door. And we have a couple of treasure that we can pick up, and then now we're on Chapter 9, which is a chapter where I still encountered poor designs, even though I was using the merchant. So again, the poor designs of Resident Evil 4 Remake have nothing to do with me not using the merchant. They're still here, regardless of whether I'm using the merchant or not. It's that simple. But you need to go in this direction and then take out this Colmillo right here. I'm going to use my knife here because this guy, he's always in the preset animation where he has to run to the spot and bark, and he dies very fast from the knife. And now that he's dead, I'm going to be able to pick up the treasure here, and then I need to trigger an arbitrary spawn right here after the second column. I mean, I don't understand why New Capcom is so insistent upon these arbitrary spawn moments where enemies spawn out of the blue when you reach certain thresholds. It's so lazy and so gamey. There's no intelligence displayed here. It's just really cheap. Almost like you're back in the early 2000s era. But right here, I'm going to use the sniper rifle to kill one of the Colmillo. Luckily for me, I killed the Colmillo that was not transformed. For some reason, the Colmillo that transforms is randomized every time. I don't know what this adds. I don't know why they have to make this very awkward. I mean, you already have these very fast enemies that have really crappy hitboxes on their attacks. Do you really have to randomize which enemy transforms? That is so dumb. And then I get rid of that one, I get rid of that one there, and then this one with the sniper rifle, so there aren't going to be any Colmillos chasing me right now. We're going to go through this door right over here. There are some supplies I can get. There's going to be some more supplies I can also get. and the game's giving me a lot of Magnum ammo. I don't know why the game does this, where it spawns a lot of Magnum ammo from these crates here, yet you don't have the Magnum. Why does it do that? It should only spawn Magnum ammo if you have the Magnum in your inventory. And I get that in the original version of Resident Evil 4, there is also Magnum ammo, but you could actually get the Magnum from within the world. Here, you can only get the Magnum from the merchant, so why would it be spawning ammunition from these crates? If you're expecting me to have the Magnum, why do you restrict him to the merchant? Doesn't make any sense. And it's just so strange how, in this chapter, you can backtrack to that room where the Red Zealot was in Chapter 8, and there is a treasure room that you can go to, and it feels like it's the right opportunity to introduce a Magnum because they actually spawn in additional enemies and Armaduros that block the way to that treasure. But why a treasure? Like, why on earth is New Capcom so insistent upon providing a strong enemy presence to guard useless treasure that has no bearing on the matter when influencing the fundamental flow of gameplay? Like, a gun is actually a lot more important than useless treasure, so why do you do that? It's so stupid. This could have been the perfect time to provide the broken butterfly as a weapon, like what was the case in the original version of Resident Evil 4, when you reunited with Ashley in Chapter 4-1. The lack of common sense displayed by the developers makes absolutely no sense. It's just like in Resident Evil Village, where when you go to a certain room in Heisenberg's factory using Heisenberg's key, you can find the second half of the hammer and also a couple of pistol bullets, but there are a lot of enemies in that one room. And that room, there is no incentive to go to that room, so why would they put a strong enemy presence to guard useless stuff like that? It doesn't make any sense. I've never heard of a development team that puts treasure above ammunition in terms of priority and in terms of importance. What other development team does this? New Capcom is the only development team that would ever prioritize treasure over ammunition. Who does that in a survival horror game? That doesn't make any sense. But there are a couple of stragglers here after you use that flash grenade, so I'm going to get rid of them using the sniper rifle and the shotgun. And now we're going to move on to the Armadura's room, and given that I have plenty of flash grenades, this room is going to be no problem. And you can actually deflect the Armaduros and put them into the animation that allows you to punish them with a melee attack. Ashley can also be useful, but I just hate how you can't tell her when to throw the flames. Like, why is it that you have to wait for an arbitrary moment where she just chooses to throw the flames, and then you have to lure enemies over to this flame so that they actually get stunned by the flame, and then you can kick them. And it's a good thing as well that the flames have lingering hitboxes on them so that they can actually stun the enemies if they walk over it. But it's still a problem either way, I would say. But either way, you should be able to use these mechanics to your advantage to dispatch the Armaduros easily and use the flash grenades to your advantage. Obviously, if you're doing no merchant, you're not going to have a lot of flash grenades. Of course, that's irrelevant because professional difficulty is clearly designed with the merchant in mind, especially when they're introducing that modifier to professional difficulty where all weapon upgrade slots are available at the start of the game, allowing you to max out on your weapons upgrades almost immediately if you have the right amount of resources for early chapters. So, yeah, that's why what I said previously was irrelevant, because they clearly designed professional difficulty with the merchant in mind. And given that it's similar to hardcore difficulty, this definitely is a contributing factor to this game's hollow gameplay, if the hardest difficulty is that similar to a previous harder difficulty. And the only difference between hardcore difficulty and professional difficulty is that professional difficulty, like I said, unlocks all the weapon upgrade slots for the weapons. It forces you to use perfect parries only, even though it doesn't really matter so much because the parry system on this game is already so badly designed. You're going to be doing everything possible to not put yourself in a position where you have to parry. But even then, you know, when you're parrying the regular Ganado and their weapons, they aren't so tough to deflect. And, you know, you can also back up from an enemy's attack, and even if they don't touch you with the weapon, you can still get the perfect parry, which I've noticed a couple of times when I was replaying the village encounter, and also with other parts of the village in Resident Evil 4 Remake. And then you have the no saves thing, and I don't understand why they remove autosaves on professional difficulty. It's just a time waster. All you're doing is just backtracking the previous areas to save, and then you just retrek back through empty areas that you've already cleared out. And you're just in a key encounter. I mean, it's literally Occam's razor. with the way they designed the autosaves, and this game is one of the longest Resident Evil games I've ever played, and yet they're still deciding to remove autosaves. Why would they do that? Not even Resident Evil 7 or Village removed autosaves. Why on earth would they remove autosaves? I don't get it. There is no logic to why they did that. I fail to see how removing autosaves contributes to any sense of increased challenge or any sense of punishment. Like, why are you punishing the player by making the early areas that much more of a retrek and that much more annoying to just backtrack through every single time? You're completely souring your experience in the previous areas by forcing the player to go through those previous areas to get back to a key encounter if a typewriter save was before those previous areas. I don't understand. You're compromising the game by doing that. You are compromising the quality of your previous areas if you're forcing people to go through those previous areas every time they want to get to a key encounter. They're literally shooting themselves in the foot with that kind of modification to professional difficulty. It is really dumb. And not as dumb as this, though. We have the stupid Navistador encounter, and I did everything I could to speed this section up, because this is one of the most stale sequences ever in this entire game, among other stale sequences in this pre-alpha. And at least this time, I made sure to unlock the staircase in that library area so that Leon can gain access to the assault rifle. But if I'm completely honest, guys, the assault rifle didn't do anything, even though it does high damage to the Navistadors, because there are so many of them, and because the assault rifle doesn't get a lot of rifle ammo if you're just picking up the rifle ammo from the world rather than crafting it, and I'm using all those crafting supplies for flash grenades. You just don't have enough ammo for the assault rifle to deal with the sheer number of enemies in the sequence. And like I said before in my previous wars through, why are there so many enemies here? This is not the official nest of the Navistadors. The official nest is in Chapter 11, yet you encounter far fewer enemies. What is up with that? That makes no sense. And why would they settle upon this to artificially extend the game's length? I can understand in Resident Evil 3 Remake putting in the number of zombies you encountered in Carlos's section when you were in the RPD area, because at least they died fast and there weren't as many, and I feel like it made sense for someone like Carlos to go through all that. Not to mention, we know that there were survivors inside of the RPD, so it makes sense why there are that many enemies. But here, there is no logic, not to mention, there are far too many of these Navistadors compared to the number of zombies you dealt with in the RPD area of Resident Evil 3 Remake. I mean, why are they again shooting themselves in the foot and trying to sour the experience further? I don't understand. And once again, relaying back to my previous points earlier about replayability, this game is filled with so many sequences like this that don't demand any form of complex thought, that don't demand any sense of engagement whatsoever from the player. You're just wasting time relying upon holes and exploits like crazy to bypass just how badly designed these entire sequences are. And because of the amount of sequences like this in this remake, it kills the replayability further. Which is why I'm saying that this is one of the least replayable Resident Evil games I have ever played in my entire life as a gamer. It's unbearable, and I don't feel like Resident Evil Village has sequences like this. And even when I'm running past all the Lycans, even when I'm running past all of the Moriekas, when I'm getting to a boss fight, or when I'm just picking up ammunition in general, or I'm just speeding through areas, or when I'm actually just doing a series of actions in rapid succession, anything like that in Resident Evil Village, it always comes across as enticing and engaging somehow. And I have no idea how that game does it, even though it is a pretty weak Resident Evil game overall. And even the DLC is pretty bad. But I would much rather play the Shadows of Rose DLC for Resident Evil Village than indulge in this entire game. And I highly doubt Separate Ways is going to be good. And what do you think they'll do for Separate Ways? You think they'll actually bring U3 in? Are we going to be fighting that second Verdugo in Separate Ways? Are we going to be going through these same mundane sequences in the Separate Ways DLC? You think they'll actually explain more of the story? You think we'll actually get more context as to how the Crimson Flames and Blue Flames work, as to what the Black Liquid is, as to why the Navistadors are such a prominent figure in this remake, or in this remake/demake? Will we actually get deeper lore on the Los Iluminados, Luis, and even Wesker? Because I seriously doubt that's the case. If the story on this game is going to be the worst story ever told in the entire Resident Evil series, and I mean that, guys, I feel like the story on this game is infinitely worse than how the storytelling was handled in Resident Evil Village. And believe me, guys, in my review of Resident Evil Village, I lambast the story to no end because of how improperly thought out a lot of the screenplay and the story scenarios were in Resident Evil Village. But somehow, the storytelling in Resident Evil 4 Remake is infinitely worse. Like, we get no context as to what the Crimson Flames and Blue Flames and the Black Liquid are. They cut out those ideas so quickly. We completely forget about them in, like, the later chapters of the game. And when Leon is curing Ashley of the Plaga, I'm like, what happened to the Black Liquid that she ingested? What even is it? And what does this have to do with the Plaga? Are the Black Liquid and the Plaga, like, two separate vectors? Does one complement the other? I don't get it. Why are the Navistadors given so much prominence? And they're formed from humans when they're birthed inside of the womb? And then they make this nest underground? Like, what the hell is that about? And then for some reason, they retcon Operation Javier into something so uninteresting. They make Krauser a caricature of a cliched war veteran. They make Luis just spouting out dumb jokes, and he has no bearing on the matter in terms of storytelling. We don't learn anything important from him. I mean, aside from a couple of notes that only confirm that this remake timeline is non-canon to the actual real timeline of Resident Evil. And then we have Ada with her terrible voice acting, and we don't understand her character very well. And Leon is just being a dunderhead because he doesn't follow up with the same character traits that were displayed back in Resident Evil 2 Remake, and those traits are not evolved upon whatsoever in the hiatus between Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 4 Remake. And all this other stuff that just doesn't allow the story to be good. There's just all sorts of confusing details present. There's so many moments where there are contradicting details. It is absolutely ridiculous, guys. But at least I can say that the whole idea of the Plagas being sealed, at least it was preserved, and it's a lot better than what happened with Miranda in Resident Evil Village, where she just happened to stumble upon the Megamycete when she wandered into a cave to die because she was so consumed by grief because of Ava's death. That, at least I can say, is better in Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 4 Remake compared to Resident Evil Village, but everything else is just god-awful. Speaking of which, we have this sequence now, and at least I have at least 5 flash grenades for this stupid sequence. But you need to headshot this guy, and then you need to come over here. The Garadors are going to come out of the wall when you get near them. And you need to stay near this Garador because he's always going to go off in this direction. I'm not entirely sure if this is consistent or not. And by the way, guys, when you go into that knife execution animation, you are not invulnerable during the animation. It is so dumb. How is that any different to a regular combat execution animation? Why are you not invulnerable during that animation? And if the enemies decide to rush you during that animation, you're screwed. But regardless, when the weak spot is exposed, you then need to use a flash grenade to hit the weak spot of the Garador to do a lot of damage, and it will take 3 flash grenades after the weak spot is exposed to kill the armored Garador. With the normal Garador, it will take 2, and I don't know if the previous 3 flash grenades actually damage his weak spot or not. It really doesn't make any sense. And those are some big close call moments right there. I tried to shoot the Garador to get him to do the combo, but he actually did the other attack, and I managed to narrowly avoid it. And then another time, I was backed into a corner because the enemy was rushing me, and I was very fortunate that when I knocked that enemy into the Garador, he prioritized the Ganado rather than me. So it's a good thing I was able to get out of those tough situations. But every time this Garador does that 5-hit combo, I'm going to shoot his weak spot, and I'm going to use a flash grenade. Oh, actually, I just realized, with the armored Garador, you don't have to use 3 flash grenades. You can actually pump in additional pistol shots after the armored Garador is stunned by the flash grenade. Because what happens is, before he actually returns back into a neutral state, I think he actually takes increased damage from your pistol shots. Because I had a couple of moments where, after I pumped in some pistol shots during the recovery animation, where he was recovering from the flash grenade, when I used the second flash grenade, it killed him. So I believe that is something important to consider when actually using the flash grenades against him. But it'll still probably take about 2 to 3 flash grenades to kill the other Garador. So you'll have to experiment a bit more with that, or rather I'll be able to experiment with that later on to see what it's like. But we then have the Navistador section, so you have no choice but to use the shotgun or the deflect system to your advantage, preferably the shotgun, because the deflection on that Navistador attack is just very wonky in its detection. Not to mention, it doesn't even kill them, and I don't think you can even do the knife execution when they're underwater, which is dumb. And you have to use the shotgun because every other weapon does not stun the Navistador for some reason, even though Navistadors are supposed to be consistently stunned by shots. So I don't understand the logic here. But once you've done that, we then have Verdugo. Verdugo, I decided to use the rocket launcher on just to speed it up because I already have a good method for dealing with him, and Carcinogen SDA does the same thing as well, where we both lure him into the room that I showcased in my worst through, and just circle Verdugo around until it times out and the elevator arrives, and then we just run to the elevator while Verdugo is chasing us. I mean, he used the rocket launcher, and I'm going to use the rocket launcher right here just to save time, because I'd rather not drag this out any further, and because I need to get S+. So I just wait until Verdugo does the attack, I then run for the button, and once he's stunned, I then use the rocket launcher, and he's dead. And before I continue on to the elevator, I'm just going to take the time to loot this room right here, which is the room that I use for Verdugo. And luckily for me, I gain access to a lot of flash grenades, thanks to the large resources. I didn't gain access to heavy grenades, though. I definitely recommend getting the crafting supplies for heavy grenades. I mean, not for, like, overall game progress, but more so for the sequences where you can skip them using heavy grenades. Like, for instance, the Wrecking Ball sequence and the anti-aircraft gun. Those sequences, if you use heavy grenades, you will skip them. So that's why you'll need the crafting recipe. But this right here, I'm just going to repeat the same method that I did back in my worst through to limit the number of enemies and remain in a stealth status. I have to hope that this Chainsaw Man doesn't omnisciently come around the corner. I mean, most of the time he'll just do that, and then he'll drop his chainsaw, indicating that he's standing still. I don't know why his AI is so sporadic with what he chooses to do. And you have to wonder why they didn't bother designing this sequence properly for stealth. Instead having to resort to very unorthodox methods to ensure the sequence is done stealthily so that there are less enemies crowding me. But then I lure the Bella sister away. I'm going to pull the switch. I'm going to make sure she doesn't attack to slow her down because she is so fast, she will catch me if I try to open this lock. It is absolutely insane just how slow Leon is in this game, that these kind of enemies can somehow catch up to him, and they're holding a chainsaw for crying out loud. That has to at least be slowing them down, yet it's still not enough because Leon is so unbearably slow in this game. He is the slowest character ever in Resident Evil history by far. And believe me, when I was playing Resident Evil Village, Ethan was so fast. He was faster than any other enemy when he was sprinting. There was no possible way for the enemies to actually catch him. And he was doing a better job at navigating tight corners and also getting past other enemies easily compared to Leon in this game. It is insane that Ethan Winters is so much better than Leon, Claire, Jill, Carlos, all these other characters that were introduced in these other Resident Evil Engine games. Yeah, Ethan Winters is a goddamn beast. That's what I have to say, and I can't wait to do that walkthrough of Resident Evil Village again. And I so need to do another walkthrough of Resident Evil 7 after this piece of garbage pre-alpha of a game. But now we just have this sequence, and like I mentioned many times before, this sequence is rigidly designed with flash grenades in mind. Carcinogen SDA in his walkthrough, he didn't actually have a flash grenade. He instead just used the sniper rifle to stun the El Gigante on top of the blast furnace, and then shoot the parasite. Because the sniper rifle, when it's upgraded, it can down the El Gigante instantly if you shoot the parasite. And actually, he didn't even use the blast furnace. He was actually going for all treasures, so he had to not use the blast furnace on the El Gigante. So he was able to kill the El Gigante very quickly because these El Gigante have less health. It sucks that he didn't know about the loop trick on the El Gigante where you just stand behind them and loop their stomp. He didn't use it whatsoever in his walkthrough, and he acknowledged many times how badly designed this entire sequence is, because there is no cover to actually avoid any of the El Gigante's attacks unless you use the exploit. That's how badly designed this entire sequence is, like I said many times before in my previous worst through, and when Carcinogen SDA is acknowledging the exact same problems, you know there is an objective flaw with that section. And now we have the minecart sequence. I actually had a weird bug with this minecart sequence, and it happened on the second minecart sequence. But for some reason, after a big jump that is scripted to occur in the second minecart sequence, I could not aim my gun. Like, Leon literally refused to aim his red 9, and so I was taking damage the entire time, and I was forced to restart. and then I replayed the sequence, and the bug never happened. So something happened in this new update to cause this rare moment where Leon chooses to not aim in the second minecart sequence for some reason. And also, something I learned about the lean mechanic, the lean doesn't actually work if you're aiming your gun. You have to not be aiming your gun for the lean to work. And the amount of times in these negative space areas where I was not encountering enemies, that the cart would just lean, even when I was pushing the left analog stick in the correct direction, it was obnoxious, but it was all because I was aiming my gun. I don't know why it is hindered by this. It's pretty silly that that is the case, but if you're going to do those negative space moments where you aren't encountering any enemies and you're dealing with the lean, don't aim your gun. But of course, in my case, I didn't aim my gun when I was doing those lean sequences, and I can't help but feel like it had some contribution to why I got this bug, where Leon refused to aim his Red 9 pistol, and I'm going to show it in my Poor Designs, a Resident Evil 4 Remake series. But now we have this part right here. This is all pretty simple, and somehow right here, these last two crossbowmen, I wasn't able to kill them, but they didn't even shoot at me. I don't know how consistent this is, but I got very lucky right there, and now I just have the Chainsaw Man to deal with. And I'm not going to have enough time to actually shoot his minecart, because he's right next to me, so I just need to stun him repeatedly. And then after that, we then have the Navistador section for Chapter 11. And the Navistador section, as long as you destroy the hive, and as long as you memorize the spawns, and you counteract the clunky behavior of the AI in this part, where they're having so much trouble navigating the environment, you'll be fine. Again, I still don't understand why there are less enemies in this sequence compared to Chapter 10. Oh, and that was very dangerous. So you gotta be very careful when actually destroying these hives right here, because you could have Navistador spawning behind you, and I was very fortunate that the deflect system worked to my favor. It's so dumb as well, because that move, it also has phantom range, and also, it looks like you should be able to crouch under it, but you can't. You would expect the move to be tailored to the Navistador's arm, but their whole entire body is classed as a weapon when they are doing that jab of theirs. It is so retarded on so many levels. And that's why you gotta use the pistol, you gotta use the deflect system if you're going to stop that bullcrap move. And moving on, we have this part right here. I made a mad dash, which is why these Navistadors are around right here. I was very fortunate they didn't choose to grab me. And I had a poor design in one of my other recordings of Chapter 11, where a Navistador did the grab animation on Lewis, and he ended up grabbing me in the process, even though I was nowhere near the Navistador. These enemies are so broken. And I find it hard to believe that Carcinogen SDA actually likes the Navistadors in this game. I much prefer the Navistadors in the original version of Resident Evil 4, though not the invisible ones from Resident Evil 4 OG, because even though they consistently flinch from the shotgun, their capacity to just stick to walls or the ceiling, just out of the blue, and they did these transitions almost instantly. You didn't even see the animation of them jumping onto the walls or anything. I mean, you could see them jumping onto the ceiling, but they had a lot of range when they were actually doing attacks on the ceiling or on the walls, and it was pretty annoying. Not to mention, you were in completely narrow corridors, and even though there were less Navistadors in the sewer section, I still found it pretty annoying either way, and there were definitely some moments of luck if you weren't choosing to kill the Navistadors. So that's what I have to say about that. But the other two Navistador sequences in Resident Evil 4 OG are miles better than the sequences in Chapters 10, 11, and 15. Because there aren't as many enemies, and even if there are a lot of enemies in those sequences in Resident Evil 4 OG, if you shoot Navistadors out of the air, regardless of your methodology, they die instantly. Here, they're just treated like any other generic enemy. You just shoot them out of the air, they fall down, and then you have to either finish them off on the ground or use a knife execution, and it just drags out the gameplay. And when you're having this many enemies be around, and they also have some pretty bad hitboxes, it is incredibly unfavorable to put in the sheer number of enemies in these poorly thought out encounters. And now we have Krauser, so Krauser is still the same. There's nothing really to him. They reduced such an incredible moment in the cutscene to now this really stale and stupid sequence where you're having to game the system to ensure Krauser doesn't cheese you because he can do some pretty annoying attacks. I mean, you can still just mash out of the grab if you get into that moment where you deflect him and he just puts you into that grab. But there are some other moves that are pretty annoying, and you're also having to preserve on knife durability, but then again, you can just repair your knife at the merchant. But if Krauser chooses to do any of his kicks out of the blue, it can come out so fast you don't really have a lot of time to avoid it. So I'm instead just going to rely upon this, where I just hug these corners right here to ensure that Krauser doesn't melee me, but he can use the sweep kick to get out of these loops. And also, because of how crappy Leon's knife detection is, because he has the most effeminate range ever with using his knife, that can also be a contributing factor to this. And I also hate it when Krauser jumps behind you without the quick turn, and even with the quick turn, you just don't have a lot of time to engage your deflection. You have to face Krauser for the deflection to work. You can't just have your back to Krauser and just initiate the deflection, because the deflection isn't omnidirectional. Yet it's tied to a button that triggers an aiming animation that locks Leon in the direction of the camera, which would theoretically allow the deflection to work, but no, apparently not. And there are a lot of moments like that occur where the enemies hit you at such an angle that the deflection just doesn't register. And this happens a lot in the twin Garador room. The amount of times I got hit by a throwable weapon when I was trying to run away from Garadors or reposition myself, even though it looked like I should have been able to deflect the projectile, it was really stupid. And also, I don't really understand how Krauser's HP works. His HP randomizes a lot. And people have mentioned that his HP is the same, but when he chooses to take increased damage is entirely up to the game. It's really stupid. And also, that right there, I deflected Krauser, yet it apparently contributed to ending the sequence. So maybe it's not damage that contributes to Krauser being finished off in this encounter. It's other factors at play. I don't know. It's very odd. But now I'm just going to make my way over to this golden egg room to get the one golden egg to deal with Salazar. And because I have flash grenades, the Plaga-type Arañas in this room are not going to be a problem, and any other Ganado I can just dispatch easily with the riot gun because it's very powerful, and I even upgraded the riot gun a bit, so it is going to be a very devastating weapon. And it's unbelievable that they can make the base version of the shotgun that powerful. I just wonder why this doesn't apply to the other shotguns, and you know, it still doesn't change how much this game is so directly influenced by the merchant in terms of natural flow of gameplay. But I just really wish the shotgun in Resident Evil Village was exactly like the shotgun in this game. I mean, the shotgun has problems, don't get me wrong, but at least it fires faster and it at least knocks over the enemies properly. In Resident Evil Village, on Village of Shadows difficulty, in order to knock over Lycans, you had to have a direct shot to the head at close range in order to knock over the Lycan. And in certain cases, if you stunned a Lycan with a sniper rifle shot to the head and then immediately followed up with a shotgun blast in a very fast time, you could knock over the Lycan. But how on earth is that practical in the slightest? Not to mention, the shotgun is also very underpowered against Lycans, and it's not very good at crowd control. But that's not really saying much, because the shotgun on this game is not very good at crowd control either. But I would much rather take the shotgun in Resident Evil 4 Remake over the shotgun in Resident Evil Village. But it still sucks that Leon can't crouch aim, and this game would have benefited from crouch aiming. I mean, with the grabs, for instance. If the grabs are going to have as ambiguous a detection as they have, it would have helped a lot if you could actually crouch to avoid the initial frames and then immediately shoot your gun or knife while crouching to stop the bullcrap hitbox from actually screwing you. Is it that hard to put in a crouch aim? Like, why can't this be the first third-person Resident Evil engine game to have crouch aiming? It doesn't make any sense. Like, all of these capabilities that Leon displays here are of a worser level than what Ethan Winters displayed in his games. Like, how could Leon be less capable than Ethan after all the punishing missions he's gone through? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. But at least I can appreciate that because it allows me to like Ethan Winters a lot more. If they can make the other characters terrible compared to Ethan Winters, that's great, because I can love Ethan Winters a lot more as a character, and as a character to play as. He is a truly phenomenal protagonist, and that's why Resident Evil 7 and Village are so much better than Resident Evil 2 Remake and 3 Remake, and also this piece of crap game, and Resident Evil 1 Remake. But we're now on this sequence, which is incredibly boring and tedious, and because I do not want to run the risk of being screwed by poor designs on the game's crappy combat, I'm instead going to use Aether's suplex method alongside the leashing exploit to punish the enemies when they decide to run away to set up back in their initial position. And it's a shame I don't have rifle ammo right now, because if I did, I could have sped up the sequence a lot more. And instead, I'm just having to rely upon my pistol right here, and it's a good thing I sold the Red 9, because the Red 9's completely pointless. This pistol is really all you need. Although a lot of people tend to run the Punisher, probably because the Punisher is the best pistol in the game. Or is the Matilda the best pistol in the game? I don't know. I can't really imagine why a gun from Resident Evil 2 Remake would be the best pistol in the game, but that's just new Capcom logic right there. if the Matilda is somehow better than the other pistols, that will not make any sense at all, because the Matilda is literally a pistol used by police officers. It's not military grade or anything. Why would that be better than the other pistols? That makes no sense. And I still don't understand why Leon carries that combat knife from Resident Evil 2 Remake. How does he even have it? Because he picked up so many combat knives from the remake of Resident Evil 2. So how could it be the same combat knife? He likely broke that combat knife that he got from Marvin when he was dealing with the enemies. How could he possibly have it? And why would it be his go-to weapon for these kind of punishing military scenarios right here that demand a lot of military weaponry? It makes no sense, guys. There is no common sense displayed by Leon, and I believe the knife and the pistol in the original version of Resident Evil 4 were custom made to Leon's specifications. Same with the pistol and the knife from Resident Evil 6, I believe. But for some reason, he did not bother customizing his weaponry to suit his playstyle. And also his existing combat prowess. It doesn't make any sense, guys. It really doesn't make any sense. But now we're just going to have to get rid of this guy right here. I'm going to take the time to use the metal balls right here to dispatch the rest of the enemies. And then we have the lift sequence. And the lift sequence is pretty simple. It's a lot better than how it is in the original version of Resident Evil 4, as I've already explained in my previous worst through. And you can definitely get it done without any enemies getting on the lift. And I believe in order to do that consistently without being so reliant upon memorizing the spawns or relying upon like heavily upgraded weaponry, you can just use flash grenades. And I actually used a lot of flash grenades for this lift sequence. And unfortunately, I ran out of gunpowder, so I could not craft any more flash grenades. But it's fine, because flash grenades are of a huge abundance in this remake for sure. But we're just rising up right now. And there is a crossbow girl, so I'm just going to take care of her with a sniper rifle. These two enemies are going to appear, so as soon as they get near the barrel, I'm going to get rid of them. This guy's going to spawn in. It's best to use the riot gun against him, or the sniper rifle. These two enemies right here, dispatch them with the riot gun. Right here, I'm just going to let them jump on. I wasn't really caring so much about the challenge, because there's not really a need. As soon as they jump, I'm going to shoot them with the shotgun. If they jump on the lift, it's fine, because unlike the original version of Resident Evil 4, there aren't any guardrails stopping the enemies from being knocked over. Yeah, the lift sequence in the original version of Resident Evil 4 was one of the worst parts of Resident Evil 4 for sure. And right here, this is where I start to use flash grenades, and look how successful my attempt is right here. This is why flash grenades can definitely help for getting the challenge done, and I'm almost at the top right now. And you can also stun the crossbow lady who's actually shooting you, because there is a third crossbow lady in the sequence. It's just I don't really know where she spawns, but she's always right below me. And now that that's done, we can then dispatch these two enemies right here. I'm going to have to speed this up because it is a time-consuming process. Then we have a third crossbowman that appears out of nowhere. Once we dispatch them, we'll be able to get to Salazar, and because I have the golden eggs, it's not going to be a problem. I am planning on doing a separate video for Salazar only, just showing how his moveset works when you're trying to fight him normally without the golden eggs, and just how badly designed he is. And I really need to put commentary as well. It's just, with how much Salazar just cheeses you with his really stupid attacks, especially his pustule attacks, and the number of bad hitboxes and poorly thought out moves, the clunky designs at play, the floating pustules that can occur right here, his ability to place pustules at a distance and under him somehow. It just makes it very annoying trying to do commentary in the middle of Salazar's boss fight, but that's not going to occur right now. I'm instead just going to use the golden eggs just to get this done, because I don't want to spend any longer with this pre-alpha if I have to. But the video's not going to end right here, because like I said before, I'm going to showcase the first half of Chapter 13, and I'm only doing this because this was all in one recording, pretty much. I believe I actually did the start of Chapter 11 with Krauser, all the way to this first half of Chapter 13. I was all in one save, so that's why I all made the recording, pretty much. So now I'm just going to disable this turret right here. We're just going to speed up this stealth sequence. This really dumb stealth sequence that the developers forgot to put mantle detection on that one window. And so they force you to rely upon really silly, unorthodox methods for doing stealth, where you have to snipe a guy or just use your pistol to get rid of him, and also get rid of the Molotov guy. And also right here, you have to wait until this crossbowman aims his crossbow to the left so that you can then stealth kill this guy safely so that he doesn't see you. And then from here, you need to take out the Molotov guy that appears when he shows himself. And you'll notice I'm using the laser sight for the first time ever with this pistol. And I have to say, guys, I didn't find the laser sight to be that good. I'd take it off at some point in this walkthrough, because it's just not that reliable. I mean, I know every single shot from your gun is classed as a focus shot when you are using the laser sight, but it's just hard to see the laser. Like, somehow the laser has less visibility than in the original version of Resident Evil 4. And it's not like it matters anyway that every shot is classed as a focus shot, because it's not exactly going to help with damage. It's not exactly going to be that useful at long range or anything like that. It's just kind of pointless, and I really find it annoying that they didn't make the laser sight better, like in Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6, or even the Evil Within 2 has a better laser sight system than this game. I mean, there were problems with the laser sight in the Evil Within 2. If the enemies got too close to you, even when the laser was on them, it could somehow miss, because the laser sight in the Evil Within 2 was more so a replacement for the reticle, rather than a completely separate system with its own programming. Whereas here, the laser sight, I would honestly say, is kind of similar to the reticle system in Resident Evil 4 Remake. It's just merely like an alternative version of a reticle. Only every single shot is classed as a focus shot, and I just don't find that to be a good enough incentive. It might have utility in the earlier chapters, but with the amount of spinels required to even get the laser sight, I mean, I could be using those spinels for other resources entirely. Why would I waste 10 spinels to get a completely different change to the reticle system? I mean, I don't really see the incentive to go for it. So that's why at a certain point in this worst through, I just take off the laser sight entirely and just put it back in storage. But I'm just going to run past these guys right here. We're going to make our way over to this building. I still don't know what that other optional area is holding. I'm just going to use the sniper rifle on these guys. It's really dumb how at certain moments enemies can just choose not to be killed instantly by the sniper rifle. That never happened in Resident Evil 5. The sniper rifle in Resident Evil 5 always instantly killed the Magini. I mean, aside from enemies that could transform. Oh, and also this right here is really stupid. Why did this guy turn? I dropped down, I didn't roll, yet he decided to turn. I didn't make any noise. Why did he turn? So stupid. And now I have to deal with this brute because this guy decided to turn and not be susceptible to a stealth attack. Awesome. And now I have to waste like 3 knife executions trying to kill this guy, or just use 2 knife executions and a couple of shotgun shells. I still wonder if there are any hidden designs with that particular brute variant. Because the one that has the wrist-mounted launcher has a hidden design where if you shoot his ammo pack when he's loading it with the shotgun, it always stuns him. And then if you kick him into a wall, you can then do a knife execution. But I don't know if this other brute variant has any hidden designs like that. Maybe when he's running, if you hit him in the leg with the shotgun, maybe he actually gets stunned. But either way, it's not practical to implement these kind of hidden designs, because you're much better off just damage racing them or just like mindlessly shooting them rather than actually engaging with the hidden designs. And New Capcom has a huge habit of doing that, and this happened a lot with Resident Evil Village, because there were a lot of hidden designs like that in Resident Evil Village that were completely pointless and were badly implemented. Like, for instance, the Lycan counter. When you shot Lycans in the head, as long as you were below them, or you were on flat ground, I mean, this didn't work with every single flat surface in Resident Evil Village for some bizarre reason. If you shot them in the head before their attack connected with you, they would go into a recoil animation and then lunge at you, and then while you were being grabbed, if you pressed L1, you could kick them away. But that animation is so badly handled, because during the animation of being launched back by the kick, they can't actually die. Their minimum HP value goes up to 1 for some reason. Also, the fact that elevation is a factor to consider when you're talking about making contact with a bullet, that doesn't make any sense. And there are so many moments where the environment was not set up in such a way to allow the detection on the counter to work. As such, you never found any need to use that mechanic, and you're just far better off just using high-powered weaponry against them, or just using the shotgun. And Resident Evil 4 Remake has very similar hidden designs like that are rendered null and void due to their impracticality and poor designs. New Capcom once again shoots themselves in the foot with the way they design these kind of mechanics. But this is the end of the series of chapters. Stay tuned for the future chapters. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.